This 911 Strong podcast is brought to you by our partners at the Police Credit Union of California.
As a financial institution founded by law enforcement for law enforcement and their families over 65 years ago, they have the experience and understanding to help you with all your financial needs,
including exclusive products designed specifically for law enforcement professionals. To become a member today, visit thepolicecu.org. That's the police, the letter C, and the letter U.org.
Or call 800-222-1391 and tell them you heard about them from the 911 Strong podcast. Hey friends, thank you for joining us on the 911 Strong podcast. With me as always is my fearless co-host, Kristen. What an episode, huh?
Yeah, that one gave me the chills. Yeah, it hit home.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about the untold stories of the North Hollywood Shootout, the infamous North Hollywood Shootout, which happened in 1997, but had a lasting impact. I think on the news, everybody talks about how the two bad guys died and that all the heroes survived. But as you'll listen in the next episode, not everybody did.
Yeah. I remember watching a couple different times, actually, the shootout at different training classes. And you're right. They always talk about the shootout. And, even moving forward, we always talk about the shootout or what's initially on the news and that particular few minutes of whatever tragedy is unfolding, but they never talk about what happens after and how it affects the officers after. And now we know that there was three, unfortunately, one being her dad, that passed away due to suicide because of the event and things that took place after that.
Coming up, we have dispatcher Crystal Street, whose father was Sergeant Sonny Medina, the spokesperson of the incident, who was actually involved in the incident. And unfortunately, a few years later, took his own life. And we're going to have his daughter, Crystal, come up and talk about her experience with the North Hollywood Shootout, which is coming up next on the 911 Strong podcast, which starts right now.
Station to all units.
Prepare to copy.
You're listening to the 911 Strong podcast.
Don't act like I never told you.
With Aram and Kristen, bringing you stimulating discussion.
No, I like the sound of that.
An entertaining conversation.
And now, here's Kristen and Aram.
It was February 1997, 2 years before I would join the police academy, when the world was rocked by images and live video of the infamous North Hollywood Shootout. At 9:17 a.m., two men who became buddies after meeting at their local gym entered the Bank of America in North Hollywood after taking some prescription muscle relaxers to calm their nerves. At 10:01 a.m., thanks to the heroic response of the LAPD, two robbers were confronted by officers and engaged in a shootout that would see over 2,000 rounds exchanged and result in one of the bloodiest shootouts in the history of the United States. At the end of the day, the only fatalities were the robbers, although some officers were severely wounded and some would suffer post-traumatic stress from the incident. With us today is Crystal Street, daughter of Sergeant Sonny Medina, who is one of the casualties no one talks about from the North Hollywood Shootout. Thank you, Crystal, for joining us on the 911 Strong podcast. With me, as always, is my co-host, Kristen. Crystal, I got to say, your story is brave. The fact that you're willing to talk about this is brave. But before we get into your story, let's talk about who Crystal is. Crystal, you're a full-time dispatcher based in Texas. You were a dispatcher in California before you moved out there. And during the pre-show, you talked about this being your 21st year in law enforcement. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
So let's talk about your father. Your father was a sergeant with the LAPD.
Yes.
So what was it like growing up with a dad who was part of one of the most famous police departments in the world?
One of the largest police departments. Grew up in law enforcement. My father was very strict, but he loved to have fun. He used to have a motto. They used to call him the Funky Comedina, go off the song, because he was always free spirited. He was a ham, very silly. But he also had that side where he never introduced us into the bad days, the good, the bad, the ugly of law enforcement. We never got to hear any of that. Growing up, it was kind of, he kept his work work and his personal until the North Hollywood bank shootout came about. And then we started to notice a change, but not anything that would have alarmed us that he would commit suicide or end his life in suicide.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those stories that you can't keep to yourself, especially as highly publicized as it was. People still talk about it today in the academies. I remember it vividly. It was in 1997, 2 years after I graduated high school, and about a year before I started my application process to join various departments. And, it was one of those things that either would have dissuaded me from joining law enforcement or encouraged me to join law enforcement. And I think if it wasn't for the heroes that were out there like your father, it would have probably sent me the other way. I saw the heroic acts as many in the country did, and it just made me motivated more to be a police officer. But we don't talk about what happened to the officers that were involved afterwards. The story that keeps getting the narrative that keeps getting put out is that it was a successful police situation where the bad guys didn't make it and good guys did. But as we know now, after hearing your story, not everybody on the good guy side made it, right?
No, my dad was one of 3 that died from suicide. They all suffered from post-traumatic, it was undiagnosed, but all 3 of them followed within years after each other.
I want to talk a little bit about what happened in the days after the shootout. What changed with your father?
I would say the biggest thing that we noticed was his demeanor. Shortly after that, obviously, they both, the department and everybody involved, were starting to get lawsuits. They had to clear an internal investigation, which was also stressful. On top of that, they got suits federally. And so within the days of my dad's death, he had to testify against the LAPD, justifying why the paramedics were never called in his portion of the supervisory portion of the episode. That also took a huge light of, why, besides his personal issues, he was also going through a divorce and some child custody stuff that I don't think he knew how to cope with it. He was never given those coping skills. He was never taught those. And I would say the red flags of joking of life would be so much easier without me, starting to give things away. Like he would give my grandfather his awards to put on his walls and stuff, which was kind of out of the norm for him. Our walls were always filled with his medals and his hero wall is what we called it. Those were things that we missed and we could kick ourselves for now, but just like my father, we weren't ready for what real law enforcement is. We were never given coping skills and the stuff that we should be looking out for, or how to help my father on his grieving and his demons, as we call it now. None of that was spoken of.
Right. What was it about? I know you mentioned that he was going through a divorce, but it seems like the shootout was kind of the trigger.
That was the huge trigger. Yeah.
What was it specifically? Was it just the trauma of being in a shootout, or was it how the department handled it?
I think it was both. No law enforcement agency in the United States was ready for something like that. They were outnumbered by guns. They had stronger guns than LAPD did. My dad spoke about that actually the night of it happening, and during the press conference, my dad was the officer who spoke about the scene. It was a huge advantage, and then the fact that now you have such a large crime scene on top of it. Obviously, still now to this day, if you get involved in a shooting, you get some days off, which is great. But what are you given after?
Right.
Are you giving a counselor? Or are you giving somebody to talk to? And the things that I saw then is my dad wasn't willing to talk. He didn't want to talk about what he felt and how he felt it, and it ended up eating inside of him. It ate him apart. And then to have to relive it every time you have to testify. it's just
Yeah, thanks to the bravery of your father and the other men and women at the agency that went through that shootout. Shortly after their testimony in 2001, the Pentagon gave the LAPD 16 M16s, which are the military versions of the AR-15s we use today. But that was a precursor to allowing agencies across the country to have more firepower and better armor. Because before that, your jacket, your bulletproof vest was your only armor, and only members of the SWAT team had plate carriers and helmets. And now you see it standard issue with every agency across the country. Everybody has a plate carrier, everybody has a helmet. So, your father did, thanks to his brave testimony, even though he was reluctant to do it, was a precursor for a lot of that. So his legacy lives on for sure. But I think you mentioned things weren't set up for talking about it. Do you think that was largely cultural? Because, I started in 99, which was 2 years after the shootout, and we didn't talk about resiliency in the academy. We didn't talk about it was okay. Instead we talked about this is survival. You fight, you get through it, and you move on to the next call. So do you think it was largely cultural, maybe?
I think it was, even to this day. My grandfather talked about, you didn't talk about feelings, and that's just how it was. And so I think now that we're coming about where you're getting taught that resiliency and how to handle it, and that it's okay to talk, it's okay to be okay, it kind of opens the door of this is the new normal. So it's a start. It's not, as great as it should be, but it's better than we were 20 years ago.
Yeah. I didn't grow up in a law enforcement home. My family was a military family. My grandfather and father were Army, but they weren't active. When they were active, I was only 5 years old, and I didn't remember much of it. But both you and Kristen grew up with law enforcement fathers. So I kind of like to pick your brain a little bit, because I want to know if I'm doing the right thing as a father. Because my 4 kids are growing up with a law enforcement father, me. And I do keep a lot of things to myself. I don't necessarily bring it home. Was that something that you preferred as a child growing up, or did you want to hear stories so you can relate, or maybe they were cool?
Being a dispatcher and seeing the other end of it, I try not to bring as much as I'd like to share with my kids, because some stuff you're A, not supposed to share, but B, what 7 or 9, 10-year-old wants to hear all the bad stuff in the world. So we try to shelter our children. Not, you don't have to share all of it, but you could say, Daddy had a really bad day at school or at work. While you were at school, Daddy did this, something short and sweet, but let him know that, Dad just had a tough day, and Daddy's going to need to take that next 5 hours to de-stress. And I think not having the ability to share and open up, or express that he had a really bad day, and the last thing he wanted to do was to hang out with us and just be alone, is we never understood that Dad had a bad day, right, until you see him on the news, or that's how we found out that Daddy had a bad day.
Sure. Were you ever curious about it, or was it just, hey, Dad came home and that was it?
Dad came home, Dad just kept to himself, and we didn't really ask questions.
Okay. So, it was a really short time if you think about it. The shooting was in February of 1997. And you said you started immediately seeing a deterioration of your father. As that progressed into 2000, I know if you were like me, when my father committed suicide, I didn't see any of the signs leading up to it until afterwards. It started making sense to me afterwards, his behavior. And you started saying he started giving stuff away to your dad, your hero wall was being dismantled. What were some of the other signs that you saw afterwards?
Not talking was the big thing that led to him, joking around that life would be so much easier without him gone. And then my dad ended up getting hurt. He got reassigned to the posse, and his horse partner ended up yanking his shoulder blade out of his arm. So
Oh.
he had to have surgery after, and he got prescribed medication, strong medication. And my dad started to abuse the medication, and he was heavily drinking as a coping mechanism for him. And then we just thought it was normal. We didn't, here I am 20 years later talking about it. And could we have caught those signs early on? Probably. But back then, that agency, LAPD, has a huge, that's all they focus on, is they have counselors and psychiatrists. And it would have been great to see something like that back then, where, that's automatic. I know now it's my agency that I'm with, or the old agency I was with, you're automatically given a counselor, whether you talk to them or not is your choice. But just like then, my father probably would not have talked to them. And that's something, you don't want to be in a situation where you feel like you're unfit for duty. You don't want your gun taken away, and you don't want to feel like you're a liability. And that's why most officers, even to this day, refuse to talk. So if I could go back and catch the warning signs, it definitely would have been giving away his items, joking around, that life would have been so much easier without him, because it's not.
Yeah.
And it really does impact so many more people, not just the immediate family, the survivors. Did any of his partners reach out to you, or what was the agency's response?
They were really great right after, which we had the funeral, and each family member, my stepmom was given a representative, and then I had my own representative, because I was at an older age where that's all they focused on was us, what we needed, how to help. And then as soon as the funeral went away, everybody went away. Sometimes when we attend events, like I'm huge in participating in events over there, they have walks, suicide prevention walks, and it's great to see and meet all these people, but they go away too. So there's never anybody steady. Thankfully, the chief now is a great advocate for law enforcement. Him and my dad were partners. He keeps in contact. Other than that, we haven't really had any contact with anybody. I say I have two blue families, the agency I work for, and then we have a blue family called Blue Help, and that's my other family, where the families were that are forgotten about.
The Blue Help organization, you're the state rep in Texas for. How did you find them, or how did they find you? And what's your involvement with them?
I was married to a law enforcement officer back in 2008. I was on an online platform with other police wives, and I knew one that ended up founding Blue Help. Later on, coming to find out, I actually knew her. I found Blue Help shortly after they were created back in 2017. Just kind of wanted extra people to talk to understand, and then to understand what I'm going through, or give me pointers. And then when we moved here to Texas, I actually participated in a conference that they were at, and I immediately knew that I wanted to be some type of volunteer. I knew that's where I needed to be. I didn't know in what platform yet, or if I was even ready to talk about it, because I spent my entire conference of the 8 hours I was there crying. So kind of started shortly. I took every volunteer position that I could, including data collection, which is probably one of the most stressful positions that there is, because you relive their life, but you also relive what happened to you, and it brings back memories of how your loved one was. And then these positions came out. There's a California representative, and then there's one within the states, and I decided that it was probably something I should do. And then I started to speak conferences and became a now I have licenses to actually talk to people. And one day, hopefully, because my agency is so small, we'll be able to have some type of peer support. But it's a start.
I know you're helping a lot of people through Blue Help, but do you find that with your involvement that it's therapeutic and helping for you?
Yes and no. Everybody has good days, and there's just bad days, and you need to take a step back. It becomes overwhelming, especially when you meet brand new people and get to hear their stories. We're opening our first ever one-of-a-kind national park here in Dallas. It's going to be for all first responders, including military that have died by suicide or passed away from suicide. That's been very therapeutic to be able to participate in those events. The more you get to understand how to cope and how to be able to help people, I think is what's impactful for me. If I would have had somebody to talk to back in 2000, some of the stuff that I went through, including trying to take my own life, probably would have been a little more easier.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of self-blaming that happens. I mean, you talk about how it impacted you, and I can't help but feel the same feelings where, was I responsible for contributing? Did I not do enough? Was I not enough? Was I a factor in those things? And it took me a long time to realize that, at least in my father's case, even if I would have involved myself to try to mitigate things or stop it, he was in a situation personally where it was going to happen. He had already made that decision on his own. And so I see a lot of the same thing in you, where you have a lot of remorse and regret, maybe some feelings that what you didn't do was enough. But I can tell you, without knowing you personally, that that wasn't you. And I think what you're doing is extremely brave right now. It's difficult for you, and that you're still out there talking about it. And we appreciate it. We in no way want to exploit your family, but we find that when people share stories like yours, it encourages others who might be going through it to talk about it as well. So I just want to thank you. I know you're emotional right now, and I see it in your face, and I can't help but getting choked up as well. I just want to give you a little encouragement that what you're doing is amazing. It's helping a lot of people, and helping a lot of people right now. So thank you for your bravery.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for continuing on in law enforcement, where a lot of people would probably shy away or shut down away from it. And you're heading it on in so many different directions with your organization and being a dispatch manager, and the whole situation sucks, but you're managing it so well, and people are able to relate to you because you're living it. You've been through it, and they can relate to you, and that's going to help them progress forward. And we only know what we know at the time, and hindsight's 2020, and we can't unfortunately relive things and take things back, but moving forward and making the most out of what we can. And I mean, it's a lot, and you're very brave and courageous for doing that. And thank you for letting down your walls and sharing your story with us, because
bravery certainly runs in the family. It's in the bloodline, and it's strong. So since your involvement with Blue Help, have there been any stories that you're able to share with us that maybe directly resulted in some success, that you were able to help somebody?
I have. I've also experienced my old agency. We had some officers lose their lives, and I got to connect with their families on a personal level. We actually we talk quite frequently, but got to hear some very similar stories and some of my old partners, and how it bettered me as a person to understand that every family that has experienced some type of loss, especially whether it be in the line of duty or by suicide, is that you can always feel that you're wanted or needed by somebody else, and how that your grieving level is the same as somebody else's. And I also am a family. My uncle died in the line of duty, and so to understand that my father's death isn't the same and treated the same as somebody who has died in the line of duty, it has also been very stressful for me, because I would say, because the way that you're treated by an agency or not treated by an agency, and the outcome of your loved one's death is treated differently, and it's made known. That's been probably my hardest outcome within this whole experience. And so being able to help people, I get phone calls all the time from people who need some type of resources, or they've just gone through a traumatic incident and they don't know where to start. Most agencies are given, you're getting 6 counseling sessions and that's all you get. Now what am I supposed to do now? And so it's always great to have these other resources, whether it be from a firefighter or a dispatcher, because dispatchers are also, nobody talks about the suicides that happen in dispatchers, but it's real. And so if you are able to give resources, whether it be a counselor or a chaplain, it's always great to know at the end of the day you were able to help somebody.
And that's something a lot of people don't talk about, is how the job affects dispatchers. You hear it when it's happening, when you take the phone calls, when it's evolving, when it's fluid, and you're still trying to get information while a person on the other end is going through the incident that they're going through. And at the end of the day, once you dispatch the officer, you're kind of left hanging. You're left to come up with your own conclusions, and that's daunting. And that's a lot of stress on your shoulders. So we talk a lot about law enforcement suicides, but we don't talk a lot about dispatcher suicides. And as you testified, that it does happen.
It does.
What are some of the coping mechanisms dispatchers? We have a lot of dispatchers that listen to our show. What are some of the de-stressors and coping mechanisms that are available to dispatchers?
I didn't know that there was actually anything, that you could do. When I was going through my stressful situations and critical incidences, I would say I leaned to alcohol, and that was a bad no-no. Now that you could look back and change, you can't change the past, but you can change the future, I became healthier, eating healthier, being able to work out, being able to take a walk, and depending on your agency size, it's as soon as you are able to unplug, you can go take a walk, take that breathing moment. But opening up to your officers, get to know them, meet them, especially after critical incidents, changes everything, because now you get to see the person and know that they're okay, where if you're just talking on the phone, it's meaningless if you don't see them. Coping mechanisms, walking, exercising, reading a book, riding a horse, things that most people take for granted, is something that could be a healthy mechanism for coping.
Yeah, I think working for smaller agencies allows you to put a face to the name.
It is.
And then there's some large agencies where the dispatch center is isolated. You never see officers there.
Yeah.
That's got to drive dispatchers nuts, right?
Actually, it wasn't so bad working for a large agency. You've got to meet a lot more people, but the being secluded portion just didn't work.
Right. So, we're in 2022 now. 24 years, 25 years past the incident. Has much evolved since then? Are we doing a better job with resiliency and checking in with our dispatchers, or are we still stuck in the ice ages?
From working from a very large agency to a very small agency, I see that the larger agencies are a lot more advanced. Haven't really seen it in my side of Texas, but the agencies that are surrounding me that are large they have opened up. I'm seeing a lot more for dispatchers wise. I see the same portion for the large agencies seem to be doing a little better. It depends on who you have. A lot of transplants are coming to Texas, so you're starting to see people who have that experience that are willing to open the doors to new things. Whether it be law enforcement or dispatcher, I would say we're doing a lot better 25 years later. I think the hardest tackle that you have is this old school mentality, and until new faces come around with new experience, it's gonna, depending on your agencies, it stays stagnant. And I would suspect in the next 10 years, we're gonna open doors and more agencies are gonna have that peer support, or people that like you and Kristen have been great with your agencies. And I've kind of seen a change within how you guys are handling things and how you're willing to talk so raw and open up these doors that nobody wants to talk to, to open. So you guys are doing a great job, and people like you, me, and Kristen, we're opening doors, and agencies may not be ready for it, but it's coming. More people are willing to talk. So
I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. Hey, Kristen, I can't help but think, I'm hearing Crystal's story here, and she's halfway across the country. Do you, as a dispatcher on the West Coast, hear and feel similarities?
As far as like the change that's happening, or
Yeah, just how things are being handled. We're at Crystal's agency and our agency and agencies that you've spoken to on the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, so like she said, I mean, some of the larger agencies already have it. They're on the ball with it. It doesn't necessarily mean they have all the tools, but it's not always being used though either. So like NYPD, I know, has all of these tools, but what was it, like a year or two, they were the highest rate for suicide.
They had like 9 in 1 month or something.
Yeah, it was something crazy. So I do think that the tools are out there, and a lot of the agencies are embracing it. There's still a lot of voluntold that are helping out, that are head of those peer support staff, and they're just there to check the boxes. So they're not really fully utilizing it, which kind of sucks. But at the same time, it's a foot in the door. And like, I have told some people at my agency, like, we just have to wait some of these people out. Not saying with like what our peer support team is doing, but just people that aren't on board with whatever particular program moving the department forward. It's, hey, you just have to wait some of them out. It is what it is. You have to wait till there's some new blood in there. And luckily with our agency, with who we have at the top ranks, they're on board with starting a peer support team. So now we're at the very, very beginning stages, which is really difficult because it's basically me and another civilian that's heading it. And we know how officers are very closed off to civilians, trying to reach out to sworn. So that's going to be another task. But I mean, again, it's a foot in the door. It doesn't mean I have to run it or have anything to do with it, but it's there and it's getting established, and then hopefully it'll take off and it takes on a life of its own. But it is opening doors. And I think with people like the three of us and other people throughout the country who are open to sharing whatever stories they've been through and being vulnerable, that it's allowing others to start letting their walls down, because we're not just saying it one time. And like you said, after, unfortunately, there's a suicide, they disappear after the event. Like, we're like continuously living, breathing, and talking about it. So it's not just a one-time thing, or just for the media that's, decided to show up for whatever event. Like, we're continuously open, being raw and honest. And so hopefully more and more people do it, and they want it, they crave it. I know some of the people in Seattle and Portland, like they need it, and they've been talking about it. And so it's moving forward. It'll get there, maybe later than sooner, but it'll get there.
This is for either of you. It seems like when it comes to law enforcement topics, suicide, that a lot of the attention, at least from my perspective, is on officers. Do you feel the same way? Do you think the dispatchers, the records staff, jailers kind of get left behind, or?
I do. I mean, like she mentioned, like, there's still a lot of states that don't even recognize dispatchers as first responders because in people's heads, we're not running to the scene, but we're not, obviously some dispatchers do different stuff, but we're giving them lifelines. Some people are teaching these people how to give CPR over the phone, or we're trying to calm down a mother that just rolled over and suffocated her baby. And we're doing this, we're listening to our friends get shot at or get killed, and we're living through this in our head. So we're not thought of that. Our record stuff, I didn't think about it until Melissa got in there, but they're reading every single detail from start to finish. And if you think about some of the child crimes, people really don't know. They think they know that there's some evil out there, but they don't really know the intricate details of the sick crap that's going on with little kids. Yeah. And these record staffs are going and reading through all of it. So yeah, it's a physically and mentally draining, and it is affecting them. And you don't think about it. And I guess to no fault of their own, but once it's brought to light and explained to them, like, you need to include these people as well. Jailers too, they go through things, or corrections officers, they see suicides, they see people getting stabbed, that kind of thing. We all are affected in some way, and it's for everybody. Stress affects everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sitting here. I know I'm the host of the show, but I'm benefiting as a listener listening to you two right now, because it was never a thought to me that our records clerks and our dispatchers would be victims of suicide. It wasn't far-fetched of an idea that I didn't know it occurred, but I didn't know that the job impacted them so much that it affected them in a way that would be the end result. So thank you for bringing awareness to that. Just someone that's sitting here listening to you two speak about it is really beneficial to me as a supervisor, and someone that wants to work their way up in the chain of the department to make some effective change. This is definitely someone, if you're like me, is going to think about and want to implement when directing a department. So thank you for bringing that up. Now, if someone is listening and they want to get involved with Blue Help, is this something that's open for volunteers?
It is. If you're not just a Blue family, you're a firefighter or a dispatcher. We have programs for every first responder. So you just go to the website and click resources. You could click on, we have a dashboard now that actually lists per first responders. Right now we just had our number 36 for suicide, and every number is an actual person. They're honored depending on their families. We don't release information on suicides unless we get permission from each family. We don't want them to have to reopen any wounds or deprive anybody of their grieving process, because each person's grieves differently. You can volunteer on any level that you feel that you need to, even if it's just speaking or getting to know another family. It's impactful. Or you could be here I am, a state representative.
Right.
So it just depends on how you want to tackle. You don't even have to lose a family to suicide, but you feel that you need to help. It's always great to either, participate in a conference. There's many conferences out there that would open your mind. It's great that as a supervisor, you take into account of other people, especially during critical incidences where you may feel that you need to participate or volunteer in helping spreading that word and breaking the stigma, because until we start to open doors, we're going to be where we are, and the numbers are going to keep climbing. We had 151 officers lose their lives last year to suicide. That includes corrections, because those are also people who are forgot about. And depending on the year, I mean, like you said, New York lost 9 in a month. So it would be great to start to see these agencies include their dispatchers and even debriefs because they're forgot
Yeah.
about, and
Yeah.
wasn't until recently when we started to have debriefs. So
Right.
depends on how you want to participate. Some people are better looking and, checking out what's going on than to participate. And that's not a bad thing. You're still looking. There are many people, I didn't know I ever wanted to participate, yet alone here I am 25 years later talking. I was just never ready. And so until you have outspoken ones, or, it's going to take time, but it's a start.
You're definitely right about it being a start, because it was very late in my career that I was called out on not including our civilian members in debriefs. And it's something I just didn't think about. Not that I didn't care, I just didn't think about it. And it's a reminder that we can all do better and we can all improve in those areas. So if you're a supervisor out in patrol, or in one of the specialized units, and your dispatchers and jailers and record staff, just remember that they're also heavily invested in the incident as well, and take a moment to include them into your debrief. And if you can't pull one of them out into your debrief, go to that unit and debrief them together. I know they'll appreciate it. It'll make you a more well-rounded supervisor in the end, because you're going to get feedback that's going to be critical to how you handle future incidents. So include that. That's something that needs to start now at every agency. And hearing you talk about that in the Dallas area, and hearing how similar it is here on the West Coast at our agency, I know that across the country that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. So thank you for bringing that up. And I also want to thank you for taking the time to come on. It's extremely brave of you to do it. As I mentioned earlier, it's something that obviously was influenced in your bloodline. The fact that you're here still talking about it, still emotional about it, it means that there's more to you, more substance to you than just the incident itself. And I think when people bring up the North Hollywood shootout, they want to talk about the shootout, the guns, the bangs, but nobody really wants to talk about the tragedy that happened at the end. So thank you for bringing awareness to that.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Well, with that, if you're interested in getting involved with the Blue Help, you can go online and you can Google Blue Help. Or what's the website?
It's actually bluehelp.org. Is our website.
Okay.
You can click on there. You could also find First Help, which is the mother of Blue Help. If you're a firefighter, I can't even speak today. I'm so sorry. It's redhelp.org. If you're a dispatcher, it's goldhelp.org. And if you're an EMS, because I'm sure you have EMS personnel working, it's actually whitehelp.org.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, thank you for bringing the information out to our audience. And even if you don't want to be involved in an organization, take the time to listen to your colleagues, look for the signs, and just, even if you just pull them aside just to talk, that can be a tremendous impact. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a good place to stop. I know we can go on for hours talking about the subject, but I think this was a very healthy discussion, and I thank you for coming on and joining us on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
All right, friends. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of the 9-1 Strong podcast. We're encouraging you to go out there and talk to your colleagues. You just might save a life. Yeah. So think about that, and we'll catch you guys next time on the 9-1-1 Strong podcast. Thank you.
Thanks.